Thank you. My name is Jospa Petronic. I'm the president and CEO of CUTRIC, which stands for the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. And I have here joining me today Jennifer McNeil, who is a vice president of sales and marketing at NFI Group, followed by Nicholas Packard, who is a vice president at Ballard Power Systems. To start off, as many of you know, we're here speaking today because of the October 17th proclamation by the President of the United States. And that proclamation has hit the bus sector directly with a 10% direct tariff with really no notable relief measures or carve-outs to protect CUSMA compliant or Buy America compliant components on buses. The busing market with streetcars and buses, coaches, streetcars, and rail is a substantial market in Canada. And so this means that potentially up to 100% of a bus may be tariffed even if it's heavily manufactured in the United States, which up until this point had obtained some protective measures. And so simply because there is some Canadian or global content, an entire vehicle may come under a tariff. And that's going to affect both Canadians and Americans almost immediately. So CUTRIC is calling on the federal government to recognize 6 critical issues and to act immediately with our organization and our manufacturing and transit partners. The first is that we are asking that CUTRIC be assigned a seat at the CUSMA renegotiation table. And this is because transit and passenger transportation in this country is a sizable industry. It employs over 12,000 people directly on the factory floor, and it employs over 12,000 people in addition in the supply chain around it. So that's over 25,000 jobs that we are looking at in this unique supply chain, which is distinct from automotive and trucking. And historically, busing and streetcars and coaches and rail have been plunked in with trucking and automotive, and that is simply insufficient for the purpose today, in particular because these tariffs do carve out and target buses and the transit and transportation industry. The second is that we're asking the federal government to support the growth of the transit and passenger transportation manufacturing sector, not through retaliatory tariffs. Retaliatory tariffs will only drive up the cost for Canadians more expeditiously than already is going to occur. Instead, we're asking the federal government to support this sector and the manufacturing growth by continuing and growing the Canada Public Transit Fund. Just to give folks a little bit of history, the Zero Emissions Transit Fund, which has preceded the Canada Public Transit Fund, issued about $2.5 billion into the public transit manufacturing sector through transit agency procurements in the last 4 years. This has been the single-handed most stable supply chain of clientele pulling the production of these vehicles. This is the reason that there has been manufacturing growth in this sector in this country. So we are asking for the Canada Public Transit Fund to be maintained at $3 billion a year and grown in the present budget coming up in November to $5 billion a year. And we are asking very immediately for at least $1.5 to $2 billion of that to be dedicated through the targeted fund to zero emissions transit procurements. And that is because the marketplace in Canada today for shovel-ready projects in zero-emissions public transit is already over $30 billion. And that accounts for only about 30 transit agencies, and there are 120 transit agencies in the country. What that means is this is a billions and billions of dollars industry with already relatively high Canadian content growing in the country that can continue to grow even more aggressively if that funding is maintained and grown. The third thing that we're asking the federal government to act on is part of its One Canadian Economy initiative, which is a standardized Canadian content rule across the country that is informed and written by the industry itself, both public transit and manufacturers here in the country. We know that Prime Minister Mark Carney is dedicated to public procurement privileging Canadian content. We are keen as an industry to support that effort. In order to support that effort, we would offer, and we are recommending that we write those rules of Canadian content procurement with the federal government. And in so doing, that will support the growth of the industry while not hindering the global supply chain upon which the industry is based. We know already that in Ontario and Quebec, there are 25% content rules. In the rest of the country, these things do not hold. And there are variations in how a Canadian job is defined. So we are asking for standardization of these content rules written by, for, and with public transit agencies and the industry itself, feeding into the federal program. The fifth ask that we have of the federal government is that we immediately expand the concept of what Canadian content is. Our Canadian content rules, what constitutes a Canadian job, was written in the 1960s. We're not in the 1960s. Our Canadian content rules need to modernize and match the reality of how public transit is purchased, procured, and manufactured today. So that means we would like to work with the federal government to establish Canadian content rules around the Canada Public Transit Infrastructure Fund that focus not just on the vehicles, but also on the infrastructure, the fueling and the energy, as well as the facilities. And this is a really critical point because we all know we have aluminum and steel and lumber in this country. And if we were able to integrate the building of facilities, and almost all transit systems in this country need renovated, expanded, and new facilities to house their transit vehicles, then we can hit a very high level of Canadian content and job growth in this sector through public transit procurements that would support aluminum, steel, lumber, and of course, vehicle manufacturing. The sixth point that we would like to raise, and this is the critical one, when you're looking at public transit in this country and the amount that public transit needs to buy, buses, shuttles, coaches, track, facilities, infrastructure, we are in the multi-billions of dollars immediately. And these are shovel-ready projects that agencies were desperate to start last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There is no doubt in our mind as an industry, this is a major project segment. So we are asking the federal government and Prime Minister Mark Carney with his new major projects office in Calgary to look beyond pipelines and shipping, which are critical and very important, to look beyond critical minerals and mining, absolutely important, and look toward an industry that they may have overlooked, which is public transit procurement. We would like to be able to submit and propose that through the Major Projects Office, the approval of public transit projects, which right now is taking 2 to 4 years through federal regulatory funding frameworks, be reduced to 3 to 6 months. There are an immediate set of projects out there. They need to move, they are shovel ready, and they will be built rapidly if the funding is maintained, if it's grown, if we work with industry on Canadian content, if we work with public transit agencies on their immediate needs, and if we move as one nation. I will conclude by saying this is truly a Team Canada initiative. This does require that we work with provinces in Ontario and Alberta so that they are contributing their component, their portion, to the Canada Public Transit Fund to support procurements and jobs in British Columbia, Manitoba, and Quebec. A true Team Canada effort to grow an industry that's 25,000 jobs strong and growing. To echo these sentiments and to give you a little bit more detail about how this tariff immediately impacts the transit manufacturing sector, I'm going to turn to our colleague Jennifer McNeil, Vice President at NFI Group. Jennifer.
Thank you, Yosipa. Well, good morning. My name is Jennifer McNeil, and I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for NFI Group's North American Public Sector business and CUTRIC's Board Chair. During the last few decades, Canada and the United States have built one of the most deeply integrated supply chains in the world for the manufacture of heavy-duty transit buses and coaches, shaped by Buy America regulations and current provincial Canadian content requirements, and enabled by CUSMA. NFI is proud to be among the largest North American bus and coach manufacturers that are headquartered and publicly traded right here in Canada as part of a growing and technology-rich sector of our economy. Under the brands New Flyer, MCI, Alexander Dennis, and Arbach Specialty Vehicles, NFI employs more than 7,500 team members across 29 North American facilities, including more than 3,200 Canadians. The United States government's recent decision to oppose a 10% tariff on imported buses, motor coaches, and parts is a significant development that impacts the entire North American transit manufacturing ecosystem. NFI recognizes that this action is rooted in broader trade and national security considerations, but its effects reach far beyond its intended targets. Over the last decade, NFI has heavily invested in both our products and our manufacturing footprint to meet the growing transit needs of North American communities and to support broader emissions and air quality goals. In fact, almost a year ago tomorrow actually, along with the Government of Canada and the Province of Manitoba, we announced further investment in our Canadian operations located in Winnipeg, including the creation of 250 direct jobs supporting the Prairie Green economy. I'm pleased to report that the project is well underway and on track to meet its objectives. Buses, parts, and components in our sector often cross the border multiple times before a finished vehicle is delivered. The bus and motor coach supply chain is distinct and separate from automotive or heavy-duty trucking and includes many purpose-built components and technologies that undergo rigorous safety testing in transit applications and are not easily sourced elsewhere. Today, both our zero-emission and conventional buses meet both Buy America and Canadian content requirements, proof that cross-border cooperation is possible alongside jobs, local jobs, and economic prosperity. The announced tariff disrupts that manufacturing footprint and flow of supply, driving up costs for both Canadian and American cities, private coach operators, taxpayers, and riders. NFI respectfully urges the Government of Canada to pursue constructive engagement with the United States to seek clarification, delay implementation, and negotiate a sectoral exemption for the bus and motor coach industry. We also encourage the Government of Canada to avoid retaliatory tariffs, which would only make a challenging situation worse, hurting Canadian manufacturers, threatening thousands of skilled workers, and straining available federal, provincial, and municipal funding for buses and coaches here in Canada. Longer term, we're calling on the Canadian government to reaffirm their commitment to CUSMA principles and protect this essential and distinct industry in our country. We believe that together we can find a solution that maintains competitiveness, supports transit growth in Canadian cities, and protects Canadian jobs and manufacturing. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, bonjour. My name is Nicolas Pocard. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Partnership at Ballard Power Systems. I'm also a board member of the Canadian Hydrogen Association and a former board member of CUTRIC. Ballard Power Systems is a Canadian manufacturer of fuel cell product based in Metro Vancouver region, British Columbia. We're also publicly traded in Canada, and we employ around 500 Canadians. We are a global leader in fuel cell engine for transit buses. Over 2,500 hydrogen buses powered by Ballard technology are in operation in 70 cities worldwide, including New Flyer transit buses in Canada and in the US. We have manufacturing sites in both Canada and the US. So our products are Buy America compliant and will meet Canadian content requirement if enacted. We urge the Canadian government to negotiate a sectoral exemption for the bus and motor coach industry. So our industry, which is integrated in both sides of the border, can continue to grow and maintain jobs in Canada. We see Canadian government investment in public transit as very critical, and we support ongoing, stable, continuous investment in the Canadian Public Transit Fund. The growth of the CPTF from $3 billion to $5 billion per year, of which $2 billion per year could be allocated to zero-emission powertrain and sustainability mobility, will ensure stable business forecasting for our public transit products. With a strong Canadian transit industry representing over 25,000 jobs, we believe that public transit projects should be part of major projects supported by the federal government. Supporting the Canadian transit and passenger transportation manufacturing sector will strengthen export to regions outside of the US also, especially to Europe, where zero-emission powertrain represent the majority of new city buses sales. We believe we can grow this industry together while reducing harmful emission with innovative Canadian technology for cleaner cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Jennifer and Nicholas. Our goal was to give you a little bit of a spectrum of the industry under threat, the risk, and also what we can do as Canadians to immediately modernize our processes, use the tools that we have at hand, and leverage the economic growth we have. And also, by the way, serve public transit, which is in desperate need of huge amounts of investment starting 5 years ago. It is an industry that has been underinvested in for years and decades. There is no doubt, and it's a no-brainer, that investing in this sector does elevate jobs while moving Canadians to their own employment, thereby elevating through a multiplier effect the economic scale and the income tax that as Canadians we would collect at the federal level. So we encourage the federal government to keep that in mind. We have several questions that have come through on behalf of media outlets, and so we will turn to our colleague here to identify those questions.
Samantha Monica here on behalf of media. Question for all is the industry bracing for long-term bus inflation, or is this seen as a short-term political problem that will disappear?
I'll start off by saying we are very well aware that although as Canadians we're reading this proclamation as a 10% hit on buses going into the United States, because of the integration of the marketplace, whether they're conventional buses or zero emissions buses, some of that price point increase and inflation is going to come back across the border. Many of the buses that Canadians buy will have been finished or partially completed in the United States, so that tariff comes right back over the border, even if there's no retaliatory tariff in place. And so we're treating it at CUTRIC as a long-term problem. This is a problem that we don't believe right now is going to go away in the short term, largely because, as we've discussed here in the last day, there is an addiction emerging, it appears, to the amount of revenue coming in from the tariffs in the United States, and it's going to be very hard for any administration in the US to pull away from that. So we're going to have to deal with the fact that everything just got more expensive in the Canadian landscape as well as the American. A long-term problem to solve with these strategic plans. I'm going to turn to our colleague Jennifer McNeil also to answer that question.
I think the answer is actually both. When we look at the impact of tariffs on bus and coach manufacturing, there are direct tariffs that the bus and coach manufacturers are experiencing as we move material back and forth across the border. But there's also an inherent tariff that is occurring on components, even if they are assembled within the United States, and the pieces of subcomponents that come from other countries. So while we're hopeful that some of the more severe impacts are a short-term problem, we actually believe that this tariff landscape is here to stay, and there are some longer-term strategies that need to be put in place.
Okay, thank you.
And then I have a question for New Flyer. Does this announcement by the US President undo years of manufacturing efforts to comply with Buy America?
No, NFI Group has a very kind of broad manufacturing footprint in North America. We have facilities that operate entirely in the United States. What some of our split build facilities, where we start the vehicle in Canada and finish in the United States, do is they provide flexibility for shifts in market. And really the biggest impact of not having that flexibility is on our workforce. So as the market demand for Canadian vehicles goes up and down, we may see a shift of where production occurs. And one of the things that has been very helpful over the last few years is dedicated federal public transit funding. It's actually helped to smooth out that activity. These tariffs, are another hurdle that we'll have to cover off. If the funding for buses and coaches here in Canada wavers, then we will end up seeing more threat of our employment, basically. Thanks.
And for CUTRIC, you said transit procurements might support steel and aluminum and even lumber. I was not aware that there's wood on these buses. What does this mean?
There is not wood on buses, I believe, but the point of the matter is if we expand the concept of what a Canadian job is or Canadian content in public transit today, it is clear that it is a vehicle or set of vehicles, charging equipment or hydrogen fueling or diesel or renewable natural gas fueling, and the supply chain and the tanks that go into that, which are not immaterial. It is the facilities in which all of this is stored. And as many folks in the transit industry will tell you, their facilities are old. They're in some cases decrepit. In some cases, they are comfortable for the fleet right now, but cannot accommodate the fleet of tomorrow, let alone 5 years from now or 20 years from now. So facilities need a massive overhaul. And when we're talking about facilities, that's where the wood and the lumber would come into play. The aluminum, the steel, that's on vehicles as well as facilities and infrastructure. But definitely there's a place here for softwood lumber in terms of the production production and growth of facilities, especially for smaller transit agencies that may be looking at facilities where that could be a material of weightiness. But certainly we see that aluminum, steel, and lumber would be critical materials in the design and build of many of these transit depots that have to be built yesterday.
Thank you. And for Ballard, is the bus market for fuel cell buses in Canada strong enough to keep your company going?
Well, for us, we see it as an integrated market. So this is the same product we're selling in both the US and Canada. So we really see the market together. And so, it's a dynamic, sometimes we have orders coming from US or from Canada, but for us, we see that really global, and also we're a global player. So we sell also our fuel cell engine to Europe. So we really see as, the demand for the market globally, so which help us to compensate for sometimes some softness in one market when regulation or funding, there's some gaps happening.
And my final question for all, are layoffs coming, and is the Canada Public Transit Fund enough to stop the effects of the tariffs?
I'm going to leave this one to our industry partner, so we'll start with Jennifer.
Well, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier, we are actually hiring in our facilities in Canada. So no, at this moment, layoffs are not coming. But what I would say is part of the rationale for the investment in Canada has been the steady funding that has been provided by the Canada Public Transit Fund, or in the past, the Zero-Emission Transit Fund and ISTIP. So at this point, no, but certainly the tariff situation is placing a huge challenge and burden on both the manufacturers and the transit agencies.
No, at Ballard we are monitoring the demand, and especially the demand for zero-emission buses, because that's where we are, fuel cell, hydrogen, zero-emission. So we'll have to see what will happen, what is the regulation, especially the impact of the new administration in the US and the support of investment, continuous investment in zero-emission technology. So we'll have to monitor and see where the market demand goes.
And to conclude on the CUTRIC front, to echo what Jennifer has noted, as well as Nicola, we do believe that the Canada Public Transit Fund, especially if it's elevated to $5 billion a year, but even at stable $3 billion per year, will maintain and grow the jobs in the sector. $5 billion per year would grow it into a global behemoth, that we are certain of. But most importantly, perhaps to conclude on that question, we strongly encourage Prime Minister Carney's cabinet to not conflate what is happening in the auto sector with the bus, coach, and manufacturing sector for passenger transportation. The auto sector has consistently been decamping to Mexico for over 25 years. That is part of what CUSMA and prior to that NAFTA allowed for. Recent announcements by Stellantis, among others, are hardly associated primarily with the tariffs. That is a great narrative. It's not the truth. The truth is that cheap labor through globalization has led to a decamping of most automotive investments from Canada to lower cost jurisdictions for well over 2.5 decades. That has not been the case in bus coaching, rail manufacturing. Those global pressures do hold in this sector, but they have not pulled away fundamentally and substantively many of the manufacturing jobs that we have just heard about here today. We are in an opposite trend, so we are requesting politely, and maybe not so politely, perhaps even a little bit aggressively, that our colleagues at the federal cabinet recognize this is a distinct industry that is growing, it is ours to lose, and that perhaps this tariff can be treated as an opportunity to invest in the sector and radically grow those jobs by serving public transit investment needs immediately. So thank you. Are there any other questions from the media? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Stefano Hollins here on behalf of media. Just a general question. What can you say to Canadians who might be unaware of the country's strength in passenger transportation manufacturing? How does our supply chain stack up in the North American context and globally?
I'll start by just giving the baselines and then turning to our colleagues in their sectors specifically. In the last 6 months, we have been literally going through an exercise of counting all the jobs on bus, coach, and rail manufacturing. We have not included the school bus industry, and we'll be doing so going forward. Just looking at the factory floor jobs, we are looking at 25,000 jobs in this sector. In adding school bus manufacturing into that picture and its supply chain, we're expecting the number to be over 30,000. That does mean this is an industry that's the size of the aluminum sector. And so quite frankly, that is the size of the industry in the North American marketplace. This is a behemoth in the sense that many of the products are designed, the headquarters and the engineering are still here, even among global companies like Alstom. A lot of intellectual property located in the Canadian footprint. Now, in terms of its capability in the global landscape, that's really a North American question on sales distribution. And so I will turn to our colleagues at New Flyer.
In the North American bus and coach industry, 2 of the 3 largest bus and coach manufacturers are headquartered in Canada. So as we look at the number of vehicles that are sold every year, the bulk of the vehicles come from Canadian companies at this point in time. When we look at the supply chain, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, the supply chain has been very heavily shaped by domestic content rules. We're able to actually balance the needs of the current provincial Canadian content requirements with Buy America and meet both and have a robust supply chain that spans both countries.
Yeah, maybe I will make a comment in the name of the hydrogen industry. I think Canada has a really unique place to play there. There is, from the entire value chain, from the production of hydrogen using electrolyzer made in Canada, to the production of blue hydrogen with carbon capture technology or other technology to use natural resources of Canada and convert that into hydrogen storage, transportation, and hydrogen usage with fuel cell. And numbers of companies like Ballard are based in Canada, so we have a unique technology existing in Canada across the country, and I think we can preserve that. And transit is one of the most mature applications for hydrogen mobility. So ranging from not just the technologies that Ballard developed for fuel cell into the buses, but also all the value chain to produce a molecule from Canadian natural resources and creating a lot of jobs along the path.
Thank you. And to conclude on that, lose the microphone part. Okay, so to conclude on that, we will also say we do encourage Premier Doug Ford to recognize that in the ring of fire of critical minerals mining, there needs to be a pull for those materials. And this is a transportation market that down the line is a pull for those materials. So we do believe it will fundamentally support the green economy, the green energy sector, and even critical mining over the very long term. So with that, it looks like those are the end of the questions from the media outlets. Thank you very much. We would like to thank folks here for attending today, and we do truly appreciate your time and effort in building this great economy. We encourage Prime Minister Mark Carney to recognize the importance of the criticality of this industry, both on the transit side, the manufacturing side, and we stand ready to help your cabinet achieve a one Canadian economy and build Canada. Thank you.